Madam Chair, this House Bill 2 is a bill that we're thankful to be able to sponsor and to be part of, and I'm going to thank Representative Meade for all his work and the cabinet's work. Of course, I think it's the heart of everybody in the legislature to make sure that our children that are at home or in foster care are taken care of. And sad to say, there's a lot of kids today that are being taken care of by their grandparents and by other folks. And this bill is really a response to the need for us as the state and legislatures and the cabinet to help some of those that are caring for children to be helped along. The opioid crisis, everything that goes on, is added to the fact that we have many kids in foster care and are taken away from their home. So I want to thank the cabinet for all their work on this. And this basically reinstitutes Kentucky Kinship Care Program and Fictive Kin Care Program that was stopped in 2013. And it basically gives services that are needed to help grandparents, fictive kin, kinship care, to be able to get the services needed that would help the child along in the needs of their life. And I'd like to turn it over to my guest to be able to explain the bill in more detail.
And thank you, Representative Fugit. And you know, kinship care, relative caregiving is a big deal in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And since 2013, the kinship care program has been under a moratorium. And the kinship care program that's currently under moratorium has been a cash assistance only program.
Can I interrupt you just for a second? Would you introduce yourself for the record, please?
Yes, ma'am. I'm Eric Clark, Commissioner for the Department for Community-Based Services.
Thank you.
And so the moratorium was put in place because the program was unsustainable financially. And since that time, the department has been finding a way to create a more robust kinship care program. This is a good first step in that direction to codify through legislation our new approach to kinship care program, to wrap services and supports around families and go beyond cash assistance only. When we talk to our relative caregivers, fictive kin caregivers across the Commonwealth, when we ask what their needs are, they talk about they need help paying for child care. They need help paying for health care. They need food assistance. And we can leverage other programs in the department with our child care assistance program, K-CHIP and Medicaid, our SNAP program, to provide these services to our caregivers. One other thing I want to note for the record is that relative caregiving in Kentucky is a national leader. We double the national average for how often we place children or children go into the custody of a relative. That is a value statement that we're proud of in the Department for Community-Based Services. We think that is a good approach for kids to keep them in a familial relationship in a setting where they know their surroundings. But it's also a value statement on behalf of our people that our families want to take care of their families. So this is an opportunity to build upon the values of our system and our people to support them with services and supports going forward. And we again thank you to the House for making this priority legislation, because it's certainly a priority for our cabinet.
Motion on the bill.
We have a motion and a second. Are there any questions? Representative Birch?
I was honored to do the kinship legislation years ago. It was supposed to be money given to the grandparents or whoever, something like $300 per child. Is that still being done?
It's still being done for those who were in the program prior to the moratorium placed in April of 2013.
The reason I ask that is that, so if you don't give them to the grandparents, you put it in foster care, so you're paying the money. What's the difference? What is the difference if you pay a foster parent or you pay the grandparent?
It'd be funding stream. So the kinship care program that's currently under moratorium is funded through TANF dollars and state general funds, whereas foster care payments is a different federal funding stream under Title 4E.
Then maybe we should be working at legislation that gets us to where we can use the federal money if you can't use state money. When we set the program up, it was to pay the grandparents because a lot of these parents are on fixed incomes and trying to make ends meet to take care of their grandchildren, which they would do probably anyway. But the child is going to suffer if there's not enough finances within that family to take care of them. If you can buy clothes, food, send them to school, things like that. We're dodging the issue. Then we can yank them out and throw them in foster care, and they may never see their relatives again. And I think anything you do to try to improve it is good, but if you don't send the money with it, you might as well just kiss it goodbye because you're going to break these grandparents or you're going to break these aunts and uncles and somebody, and they should, as long as they've got a good support to go to, they should be with their relatives. But I think we should be working toward we get the money to where it belongs and not to give it to a foster parent who, and they've got too many kids. In fact, we don't even have enough foster parents to put these children in it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this bill. As I read through it, my assumption is this is preparing us to be ready for the federal Family First, so it's necessary for those purposes?
Well, it's not necessarily necessary, but it does complement that federal act well. And building upon the values in Kentucky, this legislation incorporates nationally recognized best practices from other states. And we got that from the Annie E. Casey Foundation, who came in and gave us the information that we shared with you. They were astonished with how often we place with relatives. So given that with the Family First Act, the federal act, that we're looking at preserving that family unit and how often we place with relatives, this does complement that well. And I know Representative Burch just left, but I also want to, if I could just briefly respond and say that this proposal before you today does incorporate some cash assistance through the Kentucky Transitional Assistance Program. So we're not taking cash benefits off the table for our relative and fictive kin caregivers. It's not the $300 that was provided under the kinship care program, but they will have a level of cash assistance, including Medicaid, health care, child care assistance, et cetera.
And relatives also, sorry, that's Elizabeth Kaywood, Deputy Commissioner. Relatives may also become foster adoptive parents. And we're working on hopefully lifting a new foster home type that's child-specific recruitment that would be tailored to relative and fictive kin caregivers. And a pathway to permanency for those homes that may not necessarily involve adoption, which entails termination of parental rights. And a lot of times, because of the familial relationship, relatives and fictive kin do not want to sever those parental rights.
Representative Goforth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions. So how much would they receive in compensation under this piece of legislation? Is it a daily amount, a monthly amount, or?
With the current cash
benefit,
assistance
yes.
program, the Kentucky Transitional Assistance Program for child-only cash assistance, I believe it's $182, $186 for one child per month.
$182 a month?
I think it's either $182 or $186.
How much does a foster parent receive?
They get about, I think it's around $700 per month. But again, we are attempting, relative and fictive kin caregivers can become foster parents. And part of this legislation will ensure that our department fully discloses all of those options to the relative or fictive kin caregiver prior to placement. That's part of this solution. And then again, we're looking at lifting a new foster home type that's specifically recruited for the child, that will be tailored to relative and fictive kin caregivers, that will include an expedited approval process, some waiver of non-safety standards such as training, and then again that will lead to some permanency options, some new permanency options for the child so that they have a permanent loving home.
Have they always been eligible to be foster parents
Yes. However, there has been inconsistency across the state in how that has been disclosed to the relative or victim caregiver upon placement. We have leveraged additional federal funds through the Kinship Navigator Grant. We are providing intensive face-to-face training with all of our protection and permanency staff across the state to make sure that they're aware of this new policy and that they do implement it.
Can you send that information to us so we can get that to our constituents as well? Because this has been a very controversial topic with a lot of my constituents. They're not getting any of this assistance to take care of their grandchildren or family members, and it's placing a undue hardship on them to be able to do that. And do you think that this will decrease the amount of children in foster care if we can get these payments up for them to stay with their family members?
Well, we will have to identify this. If we do lift a new foster home type, we will have to distinguish that, I think, in our data, because there could be an initial increase. But we do believe that permanency will be achieved more timely for children in this the new foster home type.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Page number 3, it says the custodial permanency and service options required by subsection 1 of this section shall reflect nationally recognized best practices. Who will that be, or do you have a list of who that's going to that will cover?
The currently proposed service array for relative and victim caregivers has been informed by the Annie E. Casey Foundation, Casey Family Programs, and as well as peer-to-peer consultation with other states. We have gleaned best practices from other states and also the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., and we've incorporated that. And we're still working towards all the recommendations that we have received from the Annie E. Casey program and the recommendations from the Program Review and Investigation Committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. I have a quick question. I think this is great. I really applaud all of your efforts. I know that how important this is. And there are constituent questions that come up about foster care and fictive care and grandparents. And so is this trying to streamline some of that? Because I know that, for example, there's an issue with grandparents who are raising grandchildren and their inability to get any sort of help from the state because they've never been in the foster care system. Does this clear up that issue for those grandparents?
So one of the main goals of this legislation and our proposal, even through regulation, is to provide relatives, fictive kin caregivers with informed consent. Giving them a list of options so they can determine what is best for them so they can get the services they need. So yes, whether it be, do I need the resources of a foster parent, or do I need just some services? Or, what we also know is a lot of relatives, they don't want government involved in their life. They're like, we're good. Sure. It's good to know this information, but we're good for now. But it's nice to know these options in case we need to. So hopefully it will build consistency on how their options are presented to them so they can make an informed decision.
Okay, good. All right. Well, it sounds wonderful. If there are no further questions, I will entertain a motion on the bill. Oh, we do. Oh, sorry, we do. We have a motion in a second. So, Secretary, please take the roll.
Representative Bentley?
Yes.
Representative Bojanowski? Representative Bowling?
Yes.
Representative Brown?
Yes.
Representative Birch?
I'd like to explain my vote a little bit. This might be a step in the right direction, and I know Representative Fugate wouldn't offer any junk before this committee that would hurt people, but again, I still think the money should follow the child and follow the grandparents. But I'm going to vote to bring the bill out, but I still have reservations about it. I'll vote yes.
Representative Elliott? Representative Frazier,
Yes.
Representative Goforth,
Yes.
Representative Jenkins.
Briefly explain my vote. Thank you for bringing this. I think it's a great step. But I also want to say that sometimes when we talk about kinship and fictive, we act like that's the gold standard, but we have plenty of really good foster parents in this state, and this just gives one more options to the cabinet and to kids. I vote yes.
Representative Lewis,
Yes.
Representative Marzian,
Yes.
Representative Gibbons-Prunty,
Yes.
Representative Raymond, Representative Riley,
Yes.
Representative Sheldon,
Yes.
Representative Tate, Representative Weber, Representative Wilner,
Yes.
Chairwoman Mosher.
Yes. House Bill 2 passes with favorable expression. Should do the same on the floor. It is eligible for consent.
Madam Chair, I think it needs to be explained on the floor, too. It's a good bill, and people need to know what we're doing.
Sense of what it does. I mean, some of those benefits you mentioned, those families are already entitled to those, aren't they now, like Medicaid, TANF, and so forth? When you talk about kinship arrangements.
They are, but this would give that more informed consent that they could make decisions based upon their need of what level of support do they need and keep it consistent across the state so that one area of the state's receiving one level of options, whereas another area of the state is not receiving the same information.
Okay.
And this applies to relatives caring, like grandparents or aunts or uncles caring for relatives? Or who does this apply to, and how will it change how they get benefits?
Well, it does apply to relatives. One thing that I will also say about this proposal, that the kinship care program that's been under moratorium did not include fictive kin caregivers. This legislative proposal includes fictive kin caregivers, and that was legislation that passed during the 2017 session that allowed a close family friend, a coach, pastor, neighbor, whoever, to come alongside and take care of kids. So fictive kin will also be able to access these services and supports under this legislation.
Okay, and so you're saying reinstating the kinship care program, but there's no money assistance with this? Is there money assistance?
There will be cash benefits, cash assistance available to relative caregivers under the Kentucky Transitional Assistance Program.
And so how are they eligible for that, or?
Elizabeth, I'm going to have to go to Elizabeth on that one.
Okay. For the Kentucky Transitional Assistance Program, relatives would make application, and it's based on any resources or income of the child. So if the child does have, for instance, an estate, Social Security benefits, child support, those would be taken into consideration. It's not, the assistance is not based on the relative's income and resources unless the relative actually wants to receive benefits themselves.
Could you all define fictive kin, who all that encompasses?
It is defined in statute, both under KRS 199 and I think KRS 600. But it's basically someone with a significant emotional attachment, but otherwise no like blood or legal relationship to the child. It could be like a coach, a teacher, a church member, that sort of thing.
Any idea how many people maybe could take advantage of this?
How many people have taken advantage of the fictive kin? I could probably get that data for you, but I don't know that off the top of my head. Sometimes we identify a fictive kin, when we're removing a child from a home and we're talking with the parent about some placement options that they would like for the child. That's typically how a fictive kin person is identified. Sometimes talking to the child too.
So the TANF, just so I'm clear on this, so the TANF, that was the 182 a month, was that?
And then that's graduated per child, right? It's not.
Right.